Welcome, dear listeners, to this cozy audiobook adventure in the style of the great Agatha Christie. I'm delighted to present The Sinister Widow, Miss Marple Exposes a Fatal Lie, a tale of intrigue set in the sleepy village of St. Mary Mead during the post-war years. Join the incomparable Miss Jane Marple as she unravels a web of deception with her keen eye for human nature. Settle in with a cup of tea, relax, and let the mystery unfold. This story is divided into 6 chapters for your enjoyment, each about 8 to 10 minutes long. Now, let's begin.
Chapter 1. The Garden Fete, Shadowed by Suspicion. In the heart of St. Mary Mead, that quintessentially English village nestled among the verdant hills of post-war England, the summer of 1952 bloomed with a deceptive tranquility. The village, with its thatched cottages, ancient stone church, and winding lanes bordered by blooming hawthorn hedges, seemed a haven untouched by the modern world's clamor. The air carried the scent of roses and freshly cut grass, and the distant hum of bees mingled with the chatter of villagers preparing for the event of the season, the annual garden fete at Hargrove Manor. Yet beneath this idyllic surface, a current of unease rippled, one that Miss Jane Marple, the village's sharp-eyed spinster, sensed as keenly as she felt the weight of her knitting needles. Miss Marple, with her fluffy white hair tucked beneath a sensible straw hat and her blue eyes twinkling behind wire-rimmed spectacles, was a fixture in St. Mary Mead. Her modest cottage on the high street, its garden bursting with dahlias and sweet peas, belied the incisive mind within. To the casual observer, she was merely a kindly old lady, always knitting, always listening, her gentle demeanor masking a formidable intellect honed by decades of observing human nature. "People are much the same everywhere," she often remarked to her friend Dolly Bantry, her voice soft but her meaning profound. Whether in St. Mary Mead or London, their little vanities and secrets weave the same patterns. The fete, hosted by the enigmatic Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove, was the talk of the village. Hargrove Manor, a sprawling Georgian edifice with ivy-clad walls and mullioned windows, stood at the edge of St. Mary Mead, its gardens a riot of color. Eleanor, known in hushed tones as the Sinister Widow, had arrived a year prior, following the sudden death of her husband, Sir Henry Hargrove, a wealthy industrialist whose fortune stemmed from wartime munitions. His death, officially a heart attack, had sparked whispers of foul play, whispers that clung to Eleanor like the shadow of her widow's weeds. A striking woman in her 50s, with raven hair streaked with silver and piercing dark eyes, carried an air of aloof mystery. Her lavish fetes, ostensibly to win the village's favor, only deepened the speculation. Why such extravagance? What did she hide? On this sun-dappled July afternoon, the village green buzzed with anticipation. Stalls lined the lawn, offering homemade damson jam, embroidered tea towels, and Miss Marple's own contribution, a basket of knitted doilies, each stitch a testament to her patience. Children darted about, their laughter mingling with the cheerful notes of the local brass band, while villagers in their Sunday best exchanged pleasantries. The centerpiece of the fete was to be the unveiling of a magnificent cake baked by Eleanor herself, its icing sculpted into delicate roses, a symbol, she claimed, of community spirit. Miss Marple, dressed in a lavender frock and her favorite brooch, strolled among the crowd, her cane tapping lightly on the grass. She noted the undercurrents beneath the joviality. There was Timothy Hargrove, Eleanor's nephew, a handsome man in his early 30s, with a roguish charm and a reputation for reckless spending. Down from London, his tailored suit was a touch too flashy for St. Mary Mead, and his smile as he hovered near his aunt seemed calculated. Debts, no doubt, Miss Marple mused, recalling a similar young man in Chipping Cleghorn who had gambled away his inheritance. Nearby stood Mrs. Lydia Beaumont, a widow from the neighboring Rose Cottage, whose pinched features and sharp tongue marked her as Eleanor's rival. Lydia's late husband had been a business associate of Sir Henry's, and their rivalry had spilled into village life. Lydia's envious glances at Eleanor's silk dress and her muttered remarks about new money did not escape Miss Marple's notice. Jealousy is such a tiresome motive, she thought, but so very common. Mr. Silas Thorne, the manor's gardener, was another figure of interest. A burly man with a scarred face and a perpetual scowl, he moved among the rose beds with a proprietary air, muttering about the gentry's excesses. His brother, Miss Marple recalled, had worked for Sir Henry and met a tragic end. Dismissed and disgraced, he had taken his own life. Silas's resentment was palpable, and his presence near the manor kitchen that morning, ostensibly delivering herbs, piqued her curiosity. The Reverend Clement, the village vicar, fluttered about like a nervous moth, his clerical collar askew and his thin face flushed with excitement. Known for his nosy piety, he had a habit of prying into parish affairs under the guise of pastoral care. Miss Marple had heard him mention a moral dilemma involving Sir Henry's will, which he claimed Reginald Fortescue, the village solicitor, had confided in him. Clergymen do love their secrets, she thought, her needles clicking softly in her lap.
Finally, there was Miss Amelia Fortescue, Eleanor's ward and Reginald's niece, a delicate girl of 20, with wide hazel eyes and a secretive air. As Sir Henry's adopted daughter, she stood to inherit a portion of his fortune, but her nervous glances and whispered conversations with Timothy suggested hidden entanglements. Miss Marple noted the glint of a ring on Amelia's finger, a lover's token, perhaps. As the afternoon wore on, the crowd gathered around the main stall for the cake's unveiling. Eleanor, resplendent in an emerald green dress, stood beside the confection, a towering creation adorned with sugar roses. "A toast to St. Mary Mead," she declared, her voice clear and commanding. The crowd clapped, though Miss Marple detected a few forced smiles. Reginald Fortescue, a portly man with a walrus mustache, stepped forward to cut the first slice. As Eleanor's solicitor and Amelia's uncle, he carried an air of authority, his briefcase never far from his side. Reginald raised a forkful of cake to his lips, complimenting its flavor. But moments later, his face contorted. He clutched his throat, his eyes bulging, and with a strangled gasp, he collapsed onto the grass. The crowd froze, then erupted into chaos. "He's ill!" cried Lydia Beaumont. "Fetch Dr. Haydock!" shouted Timothy. Children wailed, and the band faltered. Miss Marple, seated in the shade with her tea, set her cup down calmly. "How very extraordinary," she murmured. Dr. Haydock, the village physician, pushed through the crowd, his bag in hand. But it was too late. Reginald was dead. Whispers of poison spread like wildfire, and Inspector Craddock, summoned from the county police, arrived to cordon off the scene. The cake, that innocent centerpiece, became the focus of suspicion. Tests later confirmed the grim truth. Arsenic, cunningly mixed into the icing, had claimed Reginald's life. Eleanor Hargrove, who had baked the cake, stood pale but composed as villagers cast sidelong glances. "I had no reason to harm him," she said firmly to Inspector Craddock, who scribbled in his notebook.
Reginald was my trusted solicitor, handling Henry's estate. But the whispers grew louder. The sinister widow, they called her, and the shadow of her husband's death loomed larger. Miss Marple, unnoticed in the hubbub, sipped her tea and observed. She noted Timothy's nervous pacing, Lydia's barely concealed triumph, Silas's grim silence, the vicar's fervent prayers, and Amelia's tear-streaked face. A memory flickered, a case in Little Paddocks, where a poisoned dish had masked deeper motives. The cake is too obvious, she thought. But the tea Reginald drank earlier, did he not complain of a bitter taste? As the sun dipped below the hills, casting long shadows over the green, the fete disbanded in disarray. Villagers retreated to their cottages, their gossip now tinged with fear. Inspector Craddock, a practical man with a no-nonsense mustache, approached Miss Marple as she gathered her knitting. "A bad business, Mom," he said. "Any thoughts?" Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Only that human nature, Inspector, is rarely as simple as it seems. Observe the little things, the glances, the hesitations. They tell a story." She paused, her eyes drifting to the Manor's rose garden, where a single wilted bloom caught her attention. "And perhaps check the kitchen's herb cupboard. Arsenic, you know, is not only a poison, but a weed killer." Craddock nodded, puzzled but respectful. As he walked away, Miss Marple's mind churned. The central mystery, the poisoning of Reginald Fortescue, was no mere accident. It was tied to a fatal lie, perhaps hidden in Sir Henry's will, which Reginald had been investigating. The suspects, Timothy with his debts, Lydia with her jealousy, Silas with his grudge, the vicar with his secrets, and Amelia with her hidden love, each held a piece of the puzzle. But which piece was the key? Back at her cottage, Miss Marple lit a lamp and settled into her armchair, her knitting needles resuming their rhythm. The village of St. Mary Mead, with its cozy charm and close-knit community, had once again revealed its darker side. "It's like that affair with the poisoned pen," she mused aloud, her voice soft in the quiet room. The stage was set, the clues scattered like petals in the wind. Miss Marple's keen mind, as sharp as ever, began to weave the threads together, ready to expose the truth behind the sinister widow's shadow. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Village Hall. The days following the tragic garden fete at Hargrove Manor draped St. Mary Mead in a hush of unease, as if the village itself held its breath. The sun still shone, glinting off the thatched roofs and the ancient spire of St. Mary's Church, but the air carried a chill that had little to do with the July weather. Gossip, that life-blood of village life, pulsed through tea-rooms, post-offices, and garden gates, each whispered theory more outlandish than the last. At the heart of it all was the poisoning of Reginald Fortescue, a respectable solicitor, felled by arsenic-laced cake at Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove's grand event. The shadow of suspicion fell heavily on the so-called sinister widow, yet Miss Jane Marple, knitting quietly in her cottage, knew better than to trust appearances. Miss Marple, with her delicate frame and cloud of white hair, was a familiar sight in St. Mary Mead, her presence as comforting as the village's cobblestone lanes. Her modest home, adorned with climbing roses and a neat herb garden, was a haven of calm, but her mind was anything but idle. "People reveal themselves in the smallest ways," she often said, her blue eyes sharp behind her spectacles. "A glance, a hesitation, a misplaced word, they are clues as clear as footprints." As she sipped her morning tea, gazing out at the high street, she pondered the events of the fete, her thoughts circling the suspects like a hawk over a field. The village hall, a sturdy stone building with ivy creeping up its walls and mullioned windows glinting in the sunlight,
became the epicenter of the unfolding drama. Its polished wooden floors and vases of fresh-cut flowers usually hosted whist drives and sewing circles, but today it was the stage for the inquest into Reginald's death. Villagers crowded the benches, their Sunday hats bobbing as they whispered theories. Miss Marple, seated near the back with her knitting bag, observed the assembly with her usual unobtrusive acuity. The hall smelled of beeswax and lavender, but the atmosphere was thick with tension. Inspector Craddock, a no-nonsense policeman from the county force, presided over the proceedings, his stern face softened only by a neatly trimmed mustache. He stood at a table at the front, his notebook open, as he called each suspect to give their account. The villagers leaned forward, eager for revelations, while Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her eyes missing nothing. First was Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove, the widow at the heart of the storm. She entered the hall with the poise of a duchess, her silver-streaked hair swept into an elegant chignon, her dark eyes meeting the crowd's scrutiny without flinching. Her black silk dress, subtly expensive, contrasted with the homespun attire of the villagers. "I baked the cake, yes," she said, her voice clear and measured in response to Craddock's question. "It was a gesture of goodwill for St. Mary Mead. Reginald was my solicitor, handling my late husband's estate. Why would I wish him harm? His work ensured my financial security." Her words were plausible, but Miss Marple noted the slight tremor in Eleanor's hands as she clasped them, a flicker of unease beneath her composure. Interesting, Miss Marple thought. She's hiding something, but is it guilt or fear? Next came Timothy Hargrove, Eleanor's nephew, whose boyish charm faltered under the inspector's gaze. His tailored jacket, a touch too flashy for the village, was rumpled, and his hazel eyes darted nervously. "Uncle Reggie, we got on fine. I mean, he was a bit stuffy, but no quarrels. Aunt Eleanor, though, she's been tight with the family money lately, hasn't she?" He flashed a grin, but it faded under Craddock's stare. Miss Marple's needles paused. Timothy's debts were no secret. He had been seen at the local pub, boasting of London schemes gone awry. As Eleanor's next of kin after Amelia, his motive was clear. A conviction against his aunt could clear his path to the Hargrove fortune. "Like that young man in Netherwallop," Miss Marple mused, recalling a case of greed dressed in charm. Mrs. Lydia Beaumont followed, her thin lips pursed in a familiar scowl. The widow from Rose Cottage, her graying curls pinned tightly, radiated indignation. "Eleanor Hargrove has always envied my standing in this village," she declared, her voice sharp. "Her husband's death was no heart attack. I heard Reginald say so. He was about to expose her, mark my words." Her attack on Eleanor was no secret. Her finances were strained. Reginald had recently refused her a loan, citing her extravagance. Was her attack on Eleanor a deflection, or did she know more than she let on? Jealousy is such a tiresome motive, but it runs deep, Miss Marple thought. Mr. Silas Thorne, the manor's gardener, slouched to the stand, his scarred face set in a scowl. His workman's hands, rough and calloused, gripped the table's edge. "I don't mess with kitchens," he growled. "I was in the gardens delivering rosemary for the cook, but that Hargrove lot, they ruined my brother. Sir Henry sacked him, drove him to his grave." His bitterness was palpable, and Miss Marple recalled the whispers. Silas's brother, dismissed for theft, had died by his own hand. Silas had been seen near the manor kitchen on the morning of the fete, ostensibly with herbs, but his proximity to the cake raised eyebrows. Resentment festers, Miss Marple thought, but would he risk so public a crime?
The Reverend Clement, the village vicar, was next, his thin frame trembling slightly as he adjusted his clerical collar. His pale eyes blinked rapidly behind thick glasses. "Reginald confided in me," he said, his voice pious but unsteady. "He spoke of a fatal lie in Sir Henry's will, a forgery, perhaps, that he intended to reveal. I urged him to act for the sake of morality." The crowd murmured, but Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. The vicar's collection plate had been light of late, and Reginald's estate included substantial church donations. Was his moralizing a mask for greed? Clergymen can be so very human, she thought, her mind drifting to a past case involving a sanctimonious curate. Finally, Miss Amelia Fortescue, Eleanor's ward, took the stand, her delicate features pale and her hazel eyes brimming with tears. "Uncle Reggie was like a father," she whispered, "but he disapproved of my engagement." She hesitated, glancing at Timothy, who shifted uncomfortably. "To Timothy Hargrove," she admitted, her voice barely audible. The revelation sparked whispers, a secret romance opposed by Reginald. As Sir Henry's adopted daughter, Amelia stood to inherit significantly, but only if Eleanor remained unscathed. Did she hide more than a forbidden love? Miss Marple noted the girl's fidgeting hands, the glint of a ring, perhaps an heirloom with its own story. The inquest adjourned with no clear answers, only a tangle of motives. As villagers spilled out onto the green, Miss Marple lingered, a knitting bag slung over her arm. A red herring had surfaced during the proceedings. Mrs. Weatherby, a gossipy spinster, swore she saw Silas tampering with the cake, but it turned out to be a mistaken glimpse of him weeding nearby. Another clue emerged, more promising, a discarded arsenic bottle found in the manor's dustbin, its label smudged but intact. Whose fingerprints adorned it? Craddock promised to investigate. Over tea at the vicarage with Dolly Bantry, Miss Marple shared her thoughts. "It's a puzzle, Dolly," she said, her voice soft. "Everyone has a reason to dislike poor Reginald, but poison is so personal. The cake is too obvious, don't you think? I recall a case in Little Paddocks where the poison was in the tea, not the food." Dolly, a robust woman with a penchant for drama, gasped. "You think it wasn't the cake, but everyone saw him eat it." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "People see what they expect to see. Reginald mentioned a bitter taste in his tea earlier that day, did he not? And who poured it?" Her eyes twinkled. Dolly leaned forward, eager for more, but Miss Marple only sipped her tea. "Patience, dear. The truth is like a good knit. It takes time to see the pattern." As evening fell, the village hall emptied, but the whispers lingered. Miss Marple walked home along the high street, her cane tapping softly. The manor loomed in the distance, its windows glinting like eyes keeping secrets. She paused by her garden gate, noting a wilted rose in her own bed, dusted with a faint white powder. "Weed killer," she murmured, her mind racing. Arsenic was common in gardens, but its presence in the manor's kitchen was no accident. The suspects, Timothy with his debts, Lydia with her envy, Silas with his grudge, the vicar with his piety, and Amelia with her secrets, formed a web of motives, each thread taut with possibility. But Miss Marple knew the truth lay in the details, a glance, a word, a misplaced item. As she entered her cottage, the lamplight casting a warm glow, she settled into her armchair, her knitting needles resuming their rhythm. "It's like that affair with the poisoned pen," she mused. "A lie, carefully hidden, but it always unravels." The village of St. Mary Mead, with its cozy charm and close-knit community, had revealed its darker side once more. Miss Marple's mind, as sharp as the pins in her knitting bag, was already piecing together the clues, ready to expose the fatal lie at the heart of the sinister widow's tale.
Chapter 3. Clues Among the Roses.
The summer sun continued to bathe St. Mary Mead in a golden glow, but the village's usual cheer was tempered by the shadow of Reginald Fortescue's poisoning. The garden fete, meant to be a celebration of community, had become a grim milestone, and the once lively chatter of the high street now carried a nervous edge. Hargrove Manor, with its ivy-clad walls and sprawling rose gardens, loomed at the village's edge like a silent sentinel, its beauty masking secrets. Miss Jane Marple, the elderly spinster whose gentle demeanor belied her razor-sharp mind, moved through this tension with her usual quiet grace, her knitting needles and keen observations ever at the ready. Miss Marple's cottage, a quaint haven of climbing roses and polished oak, was her sanctuary, but her true domain was the village itself. She wandered its lanes each morning, her straw hat tilted against the sun, her cane tapping a steady rhythm. "The little things matter most," she often said, her blue eyes scanning the world with the precision of a botanist studying petals. A misplaced word, a fleeting glance, they tell the truth when people think they're hidden. The poisoning at the fete, officially attributed to arsenic in Eleanor Hargrove's cake, was too neat for Miss Marple's liking. She suspected a deeper truth, one woven into the fabric of St. Mary Mead's daily life. Determined to unravel the mystery, Miss Marple accepted an invitation to tea at Hargrove Manor, ostensibly to offer condolences to the beleaguered Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove. The Manor's drawing-room was a study in elegance, with chintz curtains, a gleaming mahogany table, and a silver tea service that caught the afternoon light. Eleanor, dressed in a somber gray dress that did little to dull her striking presence, poured tea with a steady hand, though her dark eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. "Miss Marple, it's kind of you to call," she said, her voice smooth but guarded. "This dreadful business has turned the village against me." Miss Marple sipped her tea, noting its faint bergamot tang. "My dear, villages thrive on gossip, but truth has a way of surfacing, like a weed in a rose-bed. Tell me, how did you find Reginald as a solicitor? He was handling your late husband's will, was he not?" Eleanor's lips tightened. "Yes, Henry's estate was complex. Reginald was thorough, perhaps too thorough. He mentioned irregularities, but nothing specific." Her hesitation lingered, and Miss Marple filed it away, her needles clicking softly in her lap. Tea concluded, Eleanor offered a tour of the Manor's gardens, a gesture Miss Marple accepted with enthusiasm. The rose-beds, meticulously tended by Silas Thorne, were a riot of crimson and pink, their scent heavy in the warm air. As they strolled, Miss Marple's eyes caught a patch of wilted blooms near the kitchen window, their leaves dusted with a faint white powder. "Oh my," she said, bending closer. "Weed killer, perhaps. Silas is diligent, isn't he?" Eleanor nodded, distracted. "He uses arsenic-based sprays for the pests. Dreadful stuff, but effective." Miss Marple's mind whirred. Arsenic, so readily available, could easily find its way from garden to kitchen. Back in the village, the hall buzzed with activity as Reverend Clement hosted a prayer meeting, a thinly veiled excuse for communal gossip. The pews were packed, and Miss Marple slipped in quietly, her knitting bag tucked under her arm. The vicar, his thin face flushed with fervor, spoke of forgiveness, but his eyes darted nervously to the suspects seated among the congregation. Timothy Hargrove, slouched and sullen, Lydia Beaumont, her lips pursed in disapproval, Amelia Fortescue clutching a handkerchief, and Silas Thorne, who had come reluctantly, his work boots scuffing the floor. Eleanor was absent, her absence noted by all. During the tea break, Miss Marple overheard Lydia boasting to a neighbor about her special herbal tea blend, which included bitter wormwood. "It's quite the tonic," Lydia said, her voice sharp with pride. Miss Marple's eyebrows rose. Wormwood could mask arsenic's taste, could it not? Yet Lydia's boast seemed too blatant, a red herring perhaps, to deflect suspicion. People do love to show off, she thought, recalling a case in Chipping Cleghorn where a boastful confession hid a subtler crime. Another clue surfaced in the crowd's chatter. At the fête, Reginald had complained of a bitter taste in his tea long before tasting the cake. Miss Marple's memory sharpened. Timothy had been serving drinks, hovering near the tea urn with his easy smile. Lydia had lingered nearby, her eyes on Eleanor. Amelia, in a moment of apparent clumsiness, had spilled her own tea, drawing attention. Was it a diversion? The cake, so publicly poisoned, felt a misdirection, a stage prop to obscure the true method. Later, Miss Marple visited the local pub, the Blue Boar, where Silas Thorne held court in a corner, nursing a pint. His scarred face darkened as he spoke to a fellow laborer. "That Timothy is a schemer. I saw him near the dustbin after the fête. Bet he planted that arsenic bottle to frame me." Miss Marple, sipping a lemonade at the bar, noted the accusation. Silas's prints are on the bottle, but dustbins are public, and Timothy's debts make him desperate. Was Silas deflecting, or had he been set up? Inspector Craddock, ever diligent, called on Miss Marple that evening, his notebook brimming with questions. "It's a devil of a case, ma'am," he said, accepting a cup of tea in her cozy parlor. "Motives everywhere, but the evidence is thin. The arsenic bottle's prints point to Silas, but he swears he only used it for weeds. And the cake, everyone saw Eleanor prepare it." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Dear Inspector, consider the tea. Reginald mentioned its bitterness, and not everyone was watching the urn. Who poured his cup?" Craddock frowned, jotting a note. "And check the vicar's handkerchief," she added. "I noticed it at the fête, monogrammed with R.F. Curious, don't you think?"
The inspector left, puzzled but grateful. Miss Marple's suggestion about the handkerchief nagged at her. Reverend Clement, with his nervous piety, had adjusted his glasses with it during the fête near the tea table. Was it Reginald's, taken as a trophy or by mistake? And why had Amelia's engagement ring, glimpsed in the sunlight, seemed familiar? Miss Marple recalled village gossip about a stolen heirloom, a ring from the Hargrove estate. Young love can be so reckless, she mused, her needles clicking. That evening, a false alarm rippled through St. Mary Mead. A shadowy figure was spotted near the manor, prompting cries of burglary. It proved to be Reverend Clement, claiming he was checking on Mrs. Hargrove's soul. Miss Marple, hearing the news from Dolly Bantry over a late-night chat, smiled faintly. "How very pastoral," she said. "But what was he really doing there?" Dolly, her eyes wide, leaned forward. "You think he's involved, Jane?" Miss Marple's reply was cryptic. "Everyone is involved, dear, until proven otherwise." As she walked home, the village bathed in moonlight, Miss Marple paused by the churchyard where roses climbed the ancient wall. A memory surfaced, a case in Little Paddocks where a seemingly trivial clue, a misplaced sugar bowl, had unlocked a murder. Here, the wilted roses, the bitter tea, the monogrammed handkerchief, and Amelia's ring were threads in a tapestry of deception. The fatal lie, she sensed, was tied to Sir Henry's will, which Reginald had been probing. Had he uncovered a forgery, a secret that threatened someone's fortune? The suspects, Timothy with his debts, Lydia with her envy, Silas with his grudge, the vicar with his sanctimony, and Amelia with her hidden love, each held a piece of the puzzle. But the truth, Miss Marple knew, lay in the everyday, a glance, a gesture, a misplaced item. She recalled Timothy's nervous pacing at the inquest, Lydia's too eager accusations, Silas's muttered threats, the vicar's fidgeting, and Amelia's careful glances at Timothy. "It's like that affair at the vicarage," she murmured, her voice soft in the quiet night. "A lie, buried deep, but it always surfaces." Back in her cottage, Miss Marple lit a lamp and settled into her armchair, her knitting resuming its rhythm. The village hall, the manor gardens, the pub were all stages where human nature played out its dramas. The arsenic bottle was a clue, but not the whole story. The tea, the handkerchief, the ring, they pointed to a subtler crime, one masked by the spectacle of the poisoned cake. As the clock chimed midnight, Miss Marple's mind wove the threads together, her thoughts as precise as her stitches. St. Mary Mead, with its cozy charm and hidden tensions, was a microcosm of the world, and Miss Marple, its quiet guardian, was ready to expose the truth.
Chapter 4. Shadows of the Past. The golden days of summer in St. Mary Mead were beginning to soften, with the first hints of autumn whispering through the hedgerows. The village, with its thatched cottages and winding lanes, retained its picturesque charm, but the poisoning of Reginald Fortescue at Hargrove Manor's garden fete had cast a long shadow. The villagers, usually so quick to gossip over tea and scones, now spoke in hushed tones, their eyes darting toward the manor's ivy-clad walls. Miss Jane Marple, the elderly spinster whose unassuming presence belied her incisive mind, moved through this atmosphere of unease with quiet purpose, her knitting needles clicking like the ticking of a clock counting down to the truth. Miss Marple's cottage, a haven of lavender and polished oak, was her base of operations, but her true work unfolded in the village's lanes, gardens, and parlors. The past always leaves traces, she often remarked, her blue eyes sharp behind her spectacles. A letter, a grudge, a forgotten promise, they linger like dust in an attic. The mystery of Reginald's death, officially pinned on arsenic in Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove's cake, was too tidy for Miss Marple's liking. The bitter tea he'd complained of, the monogrammed handkerchief, and the wilted roses dusted with weed killer, these were the threads she wove, seeking the fatal lie at the heart of the case. Determined to uncover more, Miss Marple visited the village hall's dusty attic, where parish records and old ledgers mouldered in oak cabinets. The hall, with its stone walls and scent of beeswax, was quiet that morning, save for the creak of floorboards under her sensible shoes. Armed with a magnifying glass and a notebook, she pored over documents, her fingers tracing faded ink. Her search was rewarded with a startling discovery, a coroner's report from 3 years prior, tucked into a file on Sir Henry Hargrove's death. Officially a heart attack, the report hinted at arsenic poisoning, quickly hushed up as natural causes. Reginald, as the Hargrove solicitor, had been investigating this, Miss Marple realized. A fatal lie indeed, she murmured, her mind racing. Had Reginald's probe into the will threatened someone's inheritance? Back in the village, Inspector Craddock's investigation intensified, his stern face etched with frustration as he interviewed suspects again. Miss Marple, knitting in her garden, overheard snippets of gossip from passerbys. Timothy Hargrove's alibi that he was mingling at the fete was shaky. He admitted borrowing heavily from Reginald, loans unpaid. "I was desperate," Timothy confessed to Craddock, his charm fraying. "But kill him? Never." Miss Marple noted his flushed cheeks, reminiscent of a young man in Chipping-Cleghorn who'd lied about debts. Miss Lydia Beaumont, ever eager to point fingers, admitted to forging a letter years ago, claiming it was to expose Eleanor's scheming. "I knew her husband's death was suspicious," Lydia told Craddock, her eyes gleaming. Reginald agreed. But her own motive, jealousy and financial strain, cast doubt on her story. Miss Marple, sipping tea at the vicarage, thought, "Lydia's too quick to accuse, like that woman in Little Paddocks, hiding her own sins." Silas Thorne, the gardener, revealed a deeper grudge. Sir Henry's dismissal of his brother had led to suicide, a wound Silas carried like a scar. "I hated the Hargroves," he growled to Craddock, "but I'm no poisoner." Yet his presence near the kitchen, and the arsenic bottle with his prints, kept him in the spotlight. Miss Marple pondered, was Silas a convenient scapegoat? Reverend Clement, his piety strained, admitted overhearing Reginald's plans to expose the will's irregularities. It would have scandalized the church, he said, fidgeting with his glasses. Donations were at stake. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. The vicar's monogrammed handkerchief, marked R.F., haunted her. Had he taken it from Reginald, perhaps to wipe a poisoned cup? Amelia Fortescue, pale and tearful, confessed to Craddock that Reginald opposed her secret engagement to Timothy. He called him unworthy, she whispered, her hazel eyes darting. But I loved him. Her ring, Miss Marple recalled, matched a description of a stolen Hargrove heirloom. Was Amelia's love a motive or a distraction? A red herring emerged when a poisoned scone was found in Lydia's cottage, suggesting she was a target. Craddock investigated, but Miss Marple suspected a plant, meant to mislead. Too convenient, she thought, her needles clicking. The scone was laced with arsenic, but Lydia's dramatic reaction, fainting at the news, felt staged. Like that affair with the poisoned jam, Miss Marple mused, recalling a case where misdirection hid the truth. Over tea with Dolly Bantry, Miss Marple shared her findings. "The will is the key, Dolly," she said, her voice soft. "Reginald found a lie, perhaps a forged clause favoring Amelia or cutting out Timothy. But who benefits most?" Dolly, her eyes wide, leaned forward. "Eleanor? She's the widow." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Or someone using her as a shield. The tea, not the cake, holds the secret. And that handkerchief, why does the vicar have it?" The village buzzed with new tension when Silas slipped on wet leaves near the manor, nearly breaking his neck. He claimed sabotage, pointing to Timothy. "That lad's been sneaking about," he growled. Craddock investigated, but found no evidence, but Miss Marple noted the leaves were near the kitchen path, where the arsenic bottle was found. Coincidence? She wondered, or another distraction. Miss Marple's walks took her past the manor's rose gardens again, where she paused to chat with Silas. His scarred hands worked the soil, but his eyes were wary. "You're a clever one, miss," he said gruffly. "What do you see in all this?" Miss Marple smiled. "Only what's there, Mr. Thorne. Like these roses, beautiful, but some are poisoned at the root." Silas grunted, but his glance toward the kitchen window was telling. Had he seen something that day? A subtle clue emerged at the village shop, where Miss Marple overheard Amelia buying sugar syrup, claiming it was for baking. Yet her nervous demeanor suggested more. Sugar syrup can mask bitterness, Miss Marple thought, recalling a case where a sweet drink hid poison. Was Amelia's clumsiness at the fete a deliberate act to divert attention? Craddock, stopping by Miss Marple's cottage, shared his frustration. "The bottle's prints point to Silas, but it's too easy," he said, accepting a scone. "And the cake. Eleanor swears she left it unattended briefly. Anyone could have tampered with it." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "But the tea, Inspector. Who poured Reginald's cup? And check the vicar's study. His handkerchief may tell a story." Craddock nodded, jotting notes, though his brow furrowed at her cryptic advice.
That evening, a confrontation unfolded at the village hall during a parish meeting. Eleanor, her composure fraying, accused Lydia of spreading lies about her husband's death. "You've always hated me," she snapped, her voice echoing. Lydia retorted, "You're the poisoner, Eleanor. Reginald knew it." The crowd gasped, but Miss Marple, seated quietly, noted a letter slipping from Reverend Clement's pocket as he tried to calm the women. She retrieved it later, finding it was Reginald's notes on the will, hinting at a forged clause favoring Amelia. How curious, she thought. Why does the vicar have this? As night fell, St. Mary Mead settled into an uneasy quiet, the manor's lights glowing like eyes in the dark. Miss Marple, back in her cottage, lit a lamp and resumed her knitting, her mind weaving the clues. The wilted roses, the bitter tea, the handkerchief, the ring, the forged will, they pointed to a crime rooted in the past. Sir Henry's death, hushed up as a heart attack, was the key. Reginald's probe had threatened someone's secret, but whose?
The suspects, Timothy's debts, Lydia's envy, Silas's grudge, the vicar's piety, Amelia's love, formed a tangled web. Miss Marple recalled a case at the vicarage where a seemingly pious man hid greed. "The vicar's too nervous," she murmured, her needles clicking. "And Amelia's ring, why does it feel so familiar? The heirloom, stolen years ago, might tie to the will's lie." As the clock chimed, Miss Marple's thoughts crystallized. The poisoned cake was a distraction, the tea the true weapon. The handkerchief, the letter, the roses, they were everyday items, yet each held a clue. "It's like that affair with the poisoned pen," she said softly, her voice blending with the night's quiet. "A lie buried in the past, but it's surfacing now." St. Mary Mead, with its cozy charm and hidden tensions, was a stage for human frailty, and Miss Marple, its quiet observer, was closing in on the truth. The fatal lie, tied to Sir Henry's death and the forged will, was within her grasp, waiting to be exposed.
Chapter 5. The Web Tightens. As the first leaves of autumn began to drift across the lanes of St. Mary Mead, the village's cozy charm was strained by the lingering mystery of Reginald Fortescue's poisoning. The golden days of summer had given way to cooler evenings, and the thatched cottages, bathed in the soft glow of lamplight, seemed to huddle closer, as if guarding secrets. Hargrove Manor, with its ivy-clad walls and sprawling rose gardens, stood as a silent witness to the tragedy that had unfolded at its garden fete. Miss Jane Marple, the elderly spinster whose gentle demeanor masked a mind as sharp as her knitting needles, moved through this atmosphere of unease with quiet determination, her blue eyes scanning the village for the threads of truth. Miss Marple's cottage, a haven of lavender-scented linens and polished oak, was her refuge, but her true work unfolded in the everyday moments of St. Mary Mead, over tea, in church pews, along hedgerows. "The truth lies in the ordinary," she often said, her voice soft but certain. "A glance, a pause, a misplaced item, they betray what words conceal." The poisoning, officially tied to arsenic in Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove's cake, was too convenient for Miss Marple's liking. The bitter tea Reginald had complained of, the monogrammed handkerchief, the wilted roses dusted with weed killer, and the forged will hinted at a deeper deception, a fatal lie rooted in the past. Determined to tighten the web of clues, Miss Marple hosted a small tea at her cottage, inviting the key suspects under the guise of fostering community healing. The parlor, with its chintz curtains and crackling fire, exuded warmth, but the air was thick with tension. Eleanor Hargrove arrived first, her silver-streaked hair elegant, her dark eyes wary. Timothy Hargrove followed, his roguish charm dimmed by nervous glances. Mrs. Lydia Beaumont, her lips pursed, sat stiffly, while Silas Thorne, the gardener, loomed uncomfortably in his workman's clothes. Reverend Clement fidgeted with his collar, and Miss Amelia Fortescue, pale and delicate, clutched a handkerchief. Miss Marple, pouring tea with a steady hand, observed them all, her needles resting in her lap. "Such a sad affair, this business with poor Reginald, dear. Timothy, your debts must weigh heavily. Reginald was pressing you, wasn't he?" Timothy flushed, his teacup rattling. "He was a stickler, but I'd never hurt him." Miss Marple easily said, "Of course, dear. And Lydia, your rivalry with Eleanor. Such passion over village matters." Lydia bristled, her voice sharp. "Eleanor's no saint, whatever she claims. Reginald knew it." Eleanor's hand tightened on her cup, but she said nothing. Turning to Silas, Miss Marple smiled. "Your roses are the pride of the manor, Mr. Thorne, but that weed killer, such a dangerous thing to leave about." Silas grunted, his scarred face darkening. "I keep it locked up, miss. Someone else got to it." Reverend Clement, adjusting his glasses, murmured a platitude about forgiveness, but Miss Marple's gaze lingered on him.
And you, Reverend, with your concern for souls, Reginald's talk of a forged will must have worried you." Clement paled, stammering, "I only sought to guide him morally." Amelia, silent until now, whispered, "Uncle Reggie wanted the best for me," her eyes darting to Timothy. The tea yielded subtle revelations. Miss Marple noted Timothy's sweaty brow, Lydia's defensive posture, Silas's clenched fists, Clement's nervous tics, and Amelia's fidgeting with her ring, a Hargrove heirloom, perhaps stolen. As the guests departed, Miss Marple reflected on a clue from the fate. Amelia had dropped a vial, dismissed as perfume, but its timing near the tabletop was suspicious. Was it a red herring, or had she disposed of something more sinister? Young girls can be so clever, Miss Marple thought, recalling a case where a seemingly innocent act hid guilt. A breakthrough came unexpectedly at the village shop, where Miss Marple overheard Mrs. Weatherby, the gossipy spinster, mention seeing Reverend Clement near the tea urn at the fete, adjusting his watch. "Fussy man, always checking the time," Mrs. Weatherby said. Miss Marple's mind sharpened. Clement's watch, stopped at the fate's time, had been adjusted near the tea table. Had he tampered with Reginald's cup? And the handkerchief, monogrammed R.F., was it Reginald's, taken to wipe evidence? Clergymen can be so deceptive, she mused, her needles clicking. Inspector Craddock, dogged but frustrated, visited Miss Marple that afternoon, his notebook brimming with contradictions. "Silas's prints on the arsenic bottle are damning," he said, accepting a scone. "But he swears it was for weeds, and the cake points to Eleanor. Yet you keep mentioning the tea." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Dear Inspector, the cake is a distraction. Reginald's bitter tea came first. Check who poured it. And the vicar's study, his handkerchief, and a certain letter may hold answers." Craddock frowned, jotting notes. "You're a marvel, Miss Marple, but I wish you'd be plainer." She chuckled. "Patience, Inspector. Truth is like a good knit. It takes time." That evening, the village hall hosted another parish meeting, a tense affair where accusations flew. Eleanor, her composure fraying, confronted Lydia. "Your lies about my husband's death have poisoned this village," she snapped. Lydia retorted, "You're the poisoner, Eleanor. Reginald was on to you." In the chaos, Reverend Clement dropped a letter, which Miss Marple discreetly retrieved. It was Reginald's notes detailing a forged will clause favoring Amelia unduly, cutting out Timothy and Eleanor. How curious, Miss Marple thought. Why does the vicar have this? The letter hinted at a deeper motive. The forgery, tied to Sir Henry's death, benefited Amelia, but who had orchestrated it? Miss Marple recalled the coroner's report she'd found, suggesting Sir Henry's heart attack was arsenic poisoning, hushed up. Reginald's probe had threatened to expose this, endangering someone's fortune. But whose? Miss Marple's walks took her past the manor's rose gardens again, where she paused to chat with Silas. "You've a keen eye, Mr. Thorne. Did you see anyone near the kitchen that morning?" Silas hesitated, his scarred hands pausing. "Timothy was skulking about, miss. Looked guilty." Miss Marple nodded, filing it away. Timothy's deaths made him desperate, but his proximity to the dustbin, where the arsenic bottle was found, suggested a setup. At the church, Miss Marple slipped into the vicar's study, ostensibly to drop off a prayer book. The room was cluttered with sermon notes and hymnals, but her eyes caught a glint under a blotter. Another handkerchief, monogrammed R.F. How careless, she thought. A search of the desk revealed a vial of sugar syrup, half empty. To mask arsenic's taste, she wondered, recalling Amelia's purchase at the shop. A red herring surfaced when Timothy accused Silas of tampering with the leaves that caused his fall, but Craddock found no evidence. Miss Marple suspected another distraction, like the poisoned scone in Lydia's cottage. Someone's very clever, she thought, her mind drifting to a case in Nemesis where misdirection hid a killer. Over tea with Dolly Bantry, Miss Marple shared her thoughts. "The will is the key, Dolly," she said. "A forgery favoring Amelia threatens Timothy and Eleanor. But the vicar? Why his handkerchief? His letter? And Amelia's ring? It's the Hargrove heirloom, stolen years ago." Dolly gasped. "You think Amelia is involved?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Or someone using her. The tea, not the cake, is the clue." As night fell, St. Mary Mead settled into a tense quiet, the manor's lights glowing like watchful eyes. Miss Marple, back in her cottage, lit a lamp and resumed her knitting, her mind weaving the clues. The wilted roses, the bitter tea, the handkerchief, the letter, the ring, the sugar syrup, they pointed to a crime rooted in Sir Henry's death, a lie Reginald had uncovered. The suspects, Timothy's desperation, Lydia's spite, Silas's grudge, Clement's piety, Amelia's secrets, formed a web, but the center was elusive. Craddock arrested Silas that evening, citing the arsenic bottle's prints. Miss Marple, hearing the news, shook her head. "Wait, Inspector. The bottle's too obvious. Observe the human element. Greed, fear, love." She recalled the vicar's stopped watch, his nervous fussing at the tea table. Like that parson in Nemesis, hiding sin behind sanctity. The confrontation at the hall lingered in her mind. The dropped letter, Reginald's notes, suggested Clement knew more than he admitted. Had he forged the will, perhaps for church funds? Or was Amelia, with her tearful innocence, the key? Her ring tied to the Hargrove estate, her engagement to Timothy a motive for Reginald's opposition. As the clock chimed, Miss Marple's thoughts crystallized. The poisoned cake was a red herring, the tea the true weapon. The handkerchief, the letter, the syrup, they pointed to someone close to Reginald, someone trusted. "It's like that affair with the poisoned pen," she said softly, her needles clicking in the quiet. "A lie woven into the past, but it's unraveling." St. Mary Mead, with its cozy charm and hidden depths, was a stage for human frailty, and Miss Marple, its quiet guardian, was closing in on the truth. The fatal lie, tied to Sir Henry's death and the forged will, was within reach.
Waiting to be exposed. Chapter 6. The Fatal Lie Exposed. As autumn's first chill settled over St. Mary Mead, the village's cozy charm was overshadowed by the unresolved mystery of Reginald Fortescue's poisoning. The thatched cottages, their windows glowing softly in the dusk, seemed to guard their secrets tightly, while Hargrove Manor, with its ivy-clad walls and rose gardens, stood as a silent sentinel of the tragedy that had unfolded at its garden fete. Miss Jane Marple, the elderly spinster whose gentle demeanor masked a mind as sharp as her knitting needles, had spent weeks weaving together the threads of the case, her blue eyes missing nothing. The poisoned cake, the bitter tea, the monogrammed handkerchief, the wilted roses, the stolen ring, and the forged will, all pointed to a fatal lie rooted in the past, and tonight, in the village hall, she would unravel it. Miss Marple's cottage, with its lavender-scented linens and crackling hearth, was her haven, but her true battlefield was the village itself, its lanes, its parlors, its whispered confidences. "The truth is always there," she often said, her voice soft but certain, hidden in the everyday, like a stitch dropped in a pattern. The official verdict pinned Reginald's death on arsenic in Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove's cake, but Miss Marple knew the cake was a distraction. The bitter tea, the vicar's handkerchief, the forged will, these were the clues that held the key to the fatal lie. Determined to bring the truth to light, Miss Marple orchestrated a resolution meeting at the village hall, inviting the key suspects under the pretense of clearing the air. The hall, with its stone walls and polished oak beams, was lit by the warm glow of a fire in the hearth,
its crackle mingling with the nervous murmurs of the assembled villagers. Eleanor Hargrove sat at the front, her silver-streaked hair elegant, her dark eyes wary. Timothy Hargrove slouched nearby, his roguish charm replaced by a sullen frown. Mrs. Lydia Beaumont, her lips pursed, clutched her handbag tightly. Silas Thorne, the gardener, stood at the back, his scarred face set in a scowl. Reverend Clement fidgeted with his clerical collar, and Miss Amelia Fortescue, pale and delicate, twisted her handkerchief, her engagement ring glinting. Inspector Craddock, in his notebook at the ready, stood by the door, his stern face softened by curiosity. Miss Marple, in a lavender frock and her favorite brooch, stepped to the center of the room, her cane tapping lightly. "Good evening, dears," she began, her voice soft but commanding attention. "The tragedy at the fete has troubled us all, but tonight we shall lay it to rest. Reginald Fortescue was poisoned, not by the cake, but by a cup of tea laced with arsenic, a subtle, personal act disguised by the spectacle of the fete." The crowd gasped, and Eleanor's eyes widened. "The tea," she echoed. Miss Marple nodded. "Yes, my dear. Reginald complained of a bitter taste in his tea long before he tasted the cake. The cake was a clever distraction, meant to draw our eyes from the true method." She paused, her gaze sweeping the room. "But to understand the how, we must first understand the why. A fatal lie, buried in the past, that Reginald uncovered." She turned to Eleanor. "Mrs. Hargrove, your husband, Sir Henry, did not die of a heart attack 3 years ago, did he? A coroner's report, hastily suppressed, suggested arsenic poisoning. Reginald, as your solicitor, was investigating this, probing a forged clause in the will that favored Amelia unduly, cutting out you and Timothy." Eleanor's hand trembled, but she remained silent. Miss Marple continued, her voice steady. "The forged will was the lie, a document altered to secure Amelia's inheritance, perhaps at the expense of others. Reginald's discovery threatened someone's fortune, and his death was meant to silence him. But who had the most to gain?" She turned to Timothy, whose face paled. "Timothy, dear, your debts are no secret. You borrowed heavily from Reginald, and as Eleanor's next of kin after Amelia, you stood to gain if she were implicated. You were seen near the dustbin where the arsenic bottle was found. Did you plant it to frame Silas?" Timothy stammered, I wouldn't. I was just looking for something." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Perhaps, dear, but your desperation was clear." To Lydia, she said, "Mrs. Beaumont, your rivalry with Eleanor fueled your accusations. You forged a letter years ago to discredit her, and Reginald's refusal of a loan stung your pride. Did you poison his tea to frame her?" Lydia's lips quivered. "I despised her, but murder, never." Yet her eyes darted nervously.
Miss Marple's gaze fell on Silas. "Mr. Thorne, your grudge against the Hargroves runs deep. Your brother's ruin at Sir Henry's hands. The arsenic bottle bore your prints, but it was too convenient, wasn't it? Someone used your weed killer to shift blame." Silas grunted, his fists clenched. "I told you, miss, I'm no killer." Turning to Amelia, Miss Marple softened. "Miss Fortescue, your love for Timothy was opposed by Reginald, who called him unworthy. Your ring, a Hargrove heirloom stolen years ago, ties you to the estate's secrets. Did you drop that vial at the fete to dispose of poison, or was it mere perfume?" Amelia's tears fell. "It was perfume, I swear!" But her trembling hands betrayed her. Finally, Miss Marple faced Reverend Clement, whose face was ashen. "Reverend, you spoke of a moral dilemma, of Reginald's plan to expose the will's lie, but you had his handkerchief, monogrammed R.F., used to wipe a poisoned cup. Your watch, stopped at the fete's time, places you at the tea table. And in your study, a letter, Reginald's notes on the forgery. Why did you have them?" Clement's glasses slipped, his voice trembling. I was only guiding him." Miss Marple's voice sharpened, though still gentle.
"No, Reverend. You forged the will 3 years ago, bribed by Amelia's late father to favor her, ensuring a hefty church donation. When Sir Henry died, poisoned, not by Eleanor, but by you covered it up. Reginald's probe threatened to expose you, so you poisoned his tea, using sugar syrup to mask the taste, and planted arsenic in the cake to frame Eleanor." The hall fell silent. The fires crackled, the only sound. Clement's shoulders slumped, his face crumpling. "I didn't mean for it to go so far," he whispered. "The church was in debt. Amelia's father offered funds if I altered the will. When Henry died, I panicked, used arsenic from the garden. Reginald found out, and I had to stop him." The crowd gasped, and Craddock stepped forward, his handcuffs ready. Miss Marple continued, her voice calm. "The cake was a red herring, as was the arsenic bottle in the dustbin. Silas's prints were incidental. He used the weed killer daily. The tea, poured by you, Reverend, was the true weapon. Your handkerchief, taken from Reginald, wiped the cup clean. The stopped watch betrayed your lingering at the table, and the letter in your study sealed your guilt." Eleanor exhaled, her composure returning. "I'm no murderer," she said softly. "No, my dear. The sinister widow was a village myth, fueled by gossip. The true lie was in the will, and the true poison in greed." Timothy, Lydia, Silas, and Amelia sat stunned. Their motives, debts, envy, grudges, love, laid bare but innocent of murder. Amelia's ring, a stolen heirloom, was a minor scandal, not a crime. The poisoned scone in Lydia's cottage, Silas's fall, Timothy's skulking, all distractions, orchestrated or coincidental, that clouded the truth. Craddock stepped a courted Clement away, the vicar's head bowed. The villagers dispersed, their whispers now of relief and awe at Miss Marple's insight. Eleanor approached her, gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you, Miss Marple. You've saved me." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Truth saves us all, dear." As peace returned to St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple walked home, her cane tapping softly. The manor's lights faded behind her, the village settling into its cozy rhythm. In her cottage, she lit a lamp and resumed her knitting, the needles clicking like a metronome. "It's like that affair in Nemesis," she murmured, her voice blending with the night's quiet. "A lie, hidden behind piety, but it always unravels." The clues, the tea, the handkerchief, the letter, the roses, the ring, had formed a pattern, and Miss Marple, with her quiet observation, had stitched it together. St. Mary Mead, with its charm and hidden depths, was a microcosm of human nature, and Miss Marple, its guardian, had restored its harmony. The fatal lie, tied to Sir Henry's death and the forged will, was exposed, and the sinister widow was merely a woman wronged by gossip. As the clock chimed midnight, Miss Marple's thoughts drifted to other cases, other villages, other lies. "Human nature," she said softly, her needles pausing, "is always predictable." The fire crackled, the lamplight glowed, and St. Mary Mead slept, its secrets laid to rest.
And so ends our tale of The Sinister Widow. Miss Marple exposes a fatal lie. Thank you, dear listeners, for joining this cozy journey through the charming yet intriguing world of St. Mary Mead. If you've enjoyed this, share it with a friend over tea. Until next time, keep observing the little things. They often tell the biggest stories. Stay happy, good night, and goodbye.